the beating they tried to erase. The screams echoed through the night. An inmate lay bleeding on the floor of his cell, his face battered, his ribs cracked. He had begged the guards for help hours earlier, but no one came. The cameras caught everything, every punch, every desperate cry, but the footage was quietly erased. On Rikers Island, the truth doesn't always leave the walls. The Island of Fear. Rikers Island sits in the middle of New York City's East River, just minutes away from the glittering lights of Manhattan. From the outside, it looks like just another jail complex. But step inside, and it's a world unlike anything you can imagine. The cells are cramped, dirty, and filled with rats. In summer, the heat becomes unbearable. In winter, the cold seeps into your bones. For the men and women trapped inside, survival is the only goal. Some days are quieter, filled with a low hum of voices, the shuffling of feet and the clang of doors. New arrivals try to keep their heads down. Some pray, others write letters home. For a moment, it almost feels like the chaos is calmed, but peace at Rikers never lasts. Late one night, in a dark corridor known as the Bang, the solitary confinement unit, guards dragged a young inmate out of his cell. His crime inside? Talking back. Minutes later, other prisoners reported hearing muffled screams and heavy thuds against the wall. By morning, the boy's face was swollen beyond recognition. Hunger Games. Days on Rikers are a test of patience. Sometimes, the torture doesn't come from fists or batons. It comes from starvation. Meals are handed out on dirty trays, often cold, sometimes spoiled. Prisoners whisper stories of finding maggots in the food. The lucky ones push their trays aside and go hungry. The unlucky ones eat, then get sick. But hunger pushes people to the edge. One night in the cafeteria, two men fought over a stale piece of bread. It started with shouting, but within seconds, plastic trays flew like weapons and fists pounded flesh. The guards didn't step in. They stood back, letting the chaos play out. By the time it ended, one man lay unconscious on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. The next morning, the cafeteria returned to silence. The same trays, the same spoiled food, and the same fear that another eruption could happen at any moment. The silent wing. There are parts of Rikers you don't see in the news. Dark wings where prisoners are locked away for weeks, sometimes months, without sunlight. Inmates call it the box. Days blur into nights. Silence becomes louder than screams. A man inside once scratched messages into the pane of his wall. I can't breathe. I can't think. I'm not alive. For a while, the box feels calm. Just stillness. No fights. No chaos. Just the sound of your own heartbeat. But calm is an illusion. One night, guards found a man hanging from a torn bedsheet in his cell. He had been begging for mental health treatment for weeks, but no one listened. His death became another secret tucked away in the shadows of Rikers. The flood. Sometimes, horror doesn't come from violence at all. One summer storm, rain pounded the island. The old plumbing failed. Water poured through ceilings, flooded cells, and soaked mattresses. Prisoners screamed as the sewage lines backed up, filling the air with a stench so foul it made men gag. For hours, they sat in knee-deep dirty water. No guards rushed to help. No cleanup crews came. Just cages of men, trapped in filth. When the water finally drained, the cells remained damp and moldy. Some inmates got sick. Others coughed for weeks. But even sickness wasn't the worst part. That came later, when the same men, cold and weakened, were forced back into violent population units with stronger, desperate prisoners. That's when the fights began again. Blood in the yard. The prison yard is supposed to be a place to breathe fresh air, to stretch your legs, to feel the sun, if only for an hour. But at Rikers, the yard is a battlefield. One afternoon, tension between rival crews exploded. Shouts turned into chaos as makeshift shanks, carved from toothbrushes, melted plastic, even metal scraps, flashed in the light. Prisoners stabbed wildly, desperate to survive. Guards rushed in, swinging batons, spraying chemicals that burned skin and lungs. The air filled with screams. By the time it was over, 3 men lay bleeding in the dirt. Sirens wailed, medics ran, but inside, everyone knew the truth. The yard wasn't safe. Nowhere was. And tomorrow, it could happen again. Fire in the dark. Nighttime on Rikers is never quiet. The sounds of shouting, banging on doors, and distant footsteps fill the air. But one night, the noise wasn't from prisoners. It was from fire. In one unit, a man lit his bedsheet on fire, desperate to get attention after days without his medication. Smoke spread fast, choking the air. Inmates banged on doors, coughing, begging to be let out. For a moment, guards hesitated. Protocols, paperwork, delays. Meanwhile, the smoke thickened. Men gasped for air. Some collapsed on the floor, their lungs burning. Finally, fire crews rushed in, dragging men into the hallway. But for some, it was too late. The smell of burnt fabric and charred walls lingered long after the smoke cleared. And everyone whispered the same question. If a fire breaks out tomorrow, will anyone save us? The Rat Infestation. Days later, another nightmare crawled in, literally. Rikers has always been infested with vermin. Rats scurry through hallways, crawl into cells, and bite into food trays. But one night, a prisoner woke to a sharp sting on his foot. He looked down and saw a rat gnawing at his flesh. He screamed, kicking away, but more appeared from the cracks in the wall. Other inmates shouted too as rats scattered across the floor, searching for scraps. The guards came, laughed, and told them to deal with it. No help, no cleanup, just men trapped in cages, forced to share the night with swarms of rodents. The next morning, one man's ankle was so infected he could barely walk. His cellmate tied a rag around it, but no doctor came for days. On Rikers, even sleep wasn't safe. The beating in the showers. Some of the worst violence doesn't happen in the open. It happens where no cameras see. The showers are one of those places. Steamy, echoing chambers where prisoners are most vulnerable. One afternoon, a group cornered a young man in the showers. He had no weapon, nowhere to run. The beating was merciless. Fists slammed into his face. Ribs cracked. Water mixed with blood as he collapsed. Others stood frozen, afraid to help. By the time guards arrived, he was unconscious. They dragged him out by his arms, leaving behind a trail of red water. The rumor spread to the prison like wildfire. Step out of line and the showers will become your graveyard. Forgotten in the infirmary. If you get hurt in Rikers, you're sent to the infirmary. But for many, it feels more like a waiting room for death. Prisoners line up on thin cots, some coughing, others clutching wounds. Supplies are scarce. Doctors are few. Many wait hours, sometimes days, before being seen. One man, stabbed in the yard, was left lying for nearly a full day with only a rag pressed aside. He begged for help, whispering that he couldn't breathe. By nightfall, he was gone. Other prisoners stared in silence, realizing what it meant. At Rikers, even medical care could kill you. The riot of 2015. The boiling tension finally exploded. In 2015, one of the worst riots in recent memory tore through the jail. It began with shouting between rival crews in a housing unit. Within minutes, fists flew. Then weapons appeared, shanks, broken broom handles, sharpened scraps of metal. Guards stormed in, but the chaos was too much. Men climbed railings, swung makeshift blades, and fought like they had nothing left to lose. Tear gas filled the air, choking everyone inside. When it was over, dozens lay injured, some unconscious. Some never got back up. The official reports were watered down. The footage? Gone. But the men who lived through it never forgot. That riot was proof. Rikers wasn't just a jail. It was a war zone. The rookie's first day. Not all horrors come from inmates. Sometimes they start with the guards. On his first day at Rikers, a rookie officer walked into the housing unit. His face was nervous, his voice unsure. The prisoners saw it immediately. In a place like this, weakness is blood in the water. At first, it was just words, taunts, threats, laughter echoing from cell to cell. The rookie ignored it. But when he tried to break up a fight between two men, he froze. In seconds, he was swarmed, fists raining down on him. Other officers rushed in, swinging batons to pull him out. The rookie survived, but the message was clear. On Rikers, Even the guards aren't safe. The vanishing commissary. For prisoners, commissary is survival. A bag of chips, a packet of ramen, a bar of soap, it can mean everything. But at Rikers, even that system was corrupted. 1 week, whole orders of commissary disappeared. Inmates pay, but nothing came. The whisper started. The guards had taken it, sold it, pocketed the money. At first, men stayed quiet. But hunger and anger built up. Soon, fights broke out over stolen items. 2 men stabbing each other over a single candy bar. When questioned, the staff shrugged. It happens. And with that, trust in the system, if there was any left, vanished completely. The midnight punishment. Sometimes, punishment wasn't written in the rule book. Inmates told stories of being woken at midnight, dragged from their bunks, and taken to cold hallways. Their guards lined them against the wall. For hours they stood, no sleep, no water, no rest. Some collapsed, only to be kicked back up. 1 man, barely 18, fainted from exhaustion. Instead of being helped, he was doused with freezing water until he jolted awake, shivering and gasping. By morning, he was returned to his cell, too weak to move. His cellmate whispered, "That's how they break you." The broken phones. The phones at Rikers are a lifeline to the outside world, a way to hear your mother's voice, to tell your child you're alive. But often they don't work, or worse, they're controlled by gangs. On quiet days, men line up, hoping for a turn, but fights break out fast. One afternoon, a man refused to give up the receiver. Within seconds, he was attacked, beaten to the ground as the phone dangled above him. His blood stained the concrete, while the call went dead. For weeks, he never tried again. At Rikers, even talking to your family could cost you your life. Death in transit. Not every horror happens on the island itself. Prisoners are transported to court in packed buses, hot in summer, freezing in winter. One morning, a man with severe asthma begged for his inhaler during a long ride. The guards ignored him. By the time the bus reached the courthouse, his body was slumped against the seat. Blue lips, no pulse. Word spread quickly. Prisoners muttered that it wasn't just the cells or the food or the violence. At Rikers, danger followed you everywhere. Even on the ride meant to take you out. The flooded showers. The showers were supposed to be a place to wash away the dirt and stench of the cells. But 1 week, the pipes burst. Brown water poured from the ceilings, flooding the floor. Prisoners stood knee-deep in filthy water, the stench unbearable. At first, they laughed, splashing each other, trying to make a game of it. But soon the laughter died. Cockroaches floated across the surface. Fungus grew along the walls. Men were forced to wash in the same water they used as a toilet. When complaints were made, guards shrugged. "Be glad you're even getting water," one said. The next week, skin infections spread, and the showers that once offered a small piece of relief became another nightmare. The vanishing prisoner. One morning, word spread that a man was missing. His bunk was empty. His name wasn't called at chow. Rumors flew. Had he escaped? Was he dead? By the afternoon, whispers reached the cells. He hadn't escaped. He'd been beaten so badly by guards that he was taken out through a back door, hidden from cameras, never to return. No official report was made. His family was told he had been transferred, but the inmates knew better. That night, the halls felt colder. If a man could vanish without a trace, then anyone could. The heat wave. Summers on Rikers are brutal. Cells with no air conditioning turn into ovens. The metal bars heat up, the concrete walls radiate fire, and the air feels like it's closing in. 1 year, the heat wave was so severe that men collapsed in their bunks. Some stripped naked, pouring sink water over their heads just to survive. Guards walked by, laughing. One inmate begged for medical help after vomiting from the heat. He was told to tough it out. By the next morning, he was gone, his body found limp and pale in the sweltering cell. The death was ruled natural causes. But everyone on the block knew. The heat had killed him. The escape attempt. Desperation pushes men to try the impossible. Late one night, 2 inmates used scraps of metal to pry open a vent cover. They crawled through, inch by inch, into the guts of the prison. For a moment, freedom seemed possible, but alarms blared. Guards stormed the corridors. The men were dragged out, bloodied and beaten, before they ever saw daylight. Afterward, their unit was locked down for weeks. Meals were cut. Lights stayed on all night. Collective punishment. The escape failed, but it proved one thing. Life at Rikers was so unbearable that men were willing to risk death just to leave. The burning mattress. Sometimes rebellion sparks in the smallest ways. In one housing unit, inmates set fire to a mattress to protest their conditions. Smoke filled the air, alarms screamed, and chaos spread like wildfire. Guards in riot gear stormed the unit, swinging batons and blasting pepper spray. Men coughed, choked, collapsed on the floor. When the smoke cleared, the mattress was ash. But the punishment was far from over. Every man in that unit was beaten, some thrown into solitary for months. The fire was gone, but the message burned on: resist and you'll pay the price. The cold cells. Winter on Rikers creeps in like an invisible predator. The walls sweat with dampness. The draft slips under the doors, and the thin metal bunks grow colder than stone. Inside, prisoners wrap themselves in state-issued blankets, so thin you can see light through them. Some pace their cells all night long, try and keep warm. Others sit shivering, teeth chattering, eyes wide open until dawn. One man, a father too, pressed his ear to the wall just to hear muffled voices from the cell next door. It was the only thing reminding him he wasn't alone. His cellmate rubbed his hands until the skin split, desperate to create heat. But for one inmate, the cold was too much. In the early hours of the morning, he stopped moving. His body stiffened. His chest never rose again. When guards finally checked, they said it was heart failure. The men inside knew better. He froze to death in a New York jail, less than a mile from the richest city in America. The price of protection. Not everyone has the strength to fight. At Rikers, survival often comes with a price tag. Gangs control entire housing units. If you want safety, you have to pay. Sometimes it's food from commissary. Sometimes it's cigarettes, a bar of soap, or even your clothes. And when you can't pay, your life is a currency. A teenager, barely 18, begged an older crew for protection. For a while, he was safe. But when he ran out of ramen packs and candy bars to trade, the protection ended that night. For men dragged him into a corner and beat him until his face swelled shut. The next morning, he walked with a limp, his eyes empty, his mouth wired shut from broken teeth. He never asked anyone for help again. The lesson was carved into his body. At Rikers, safety is never free. The stolen breath. Some horrors happen in plain sight. During a heated argument in a housing unit, an officer snapped. He lunged at an inmate, wrapped his arm around the man's throat, and squeezed. The prisoner's face turned red, then purple. He clawed at the officer's arm, gasping, kicking, trying to break free. Other prisoners banged on the doors, screaming, "Let him go! You're killing him!" But their cries only echoed off the concrete walls. The man's body went limp before the officer finally released him. By the time medical staff rushed in, the damage was done. On paper, the incident was labeled an altercation. In reality, it was one more life choked out in a place already drowning in silence. The hunger strike. Sometimes, the prisoners fight back, not with weapons, but with the only thing they control: their bodies. In one housing unit, dozens refuse food for days. They push away trays of rotten meat and spoiled milk, demanding better conditions, demanding justice. Guards laughed at first, calling it bluff. But as the days stretched on, men grew weaker. Some collapsed on the concrete floors. Others whispered prayers as they clutched their stomachs. Lawyers outside caught wind. Pressure mounted. The warden made promises of reform. But once the spotlight faded, the punishment began. Extra lockdowns. No visits. Fewer showers. Nights stretched endlessly, with the lights left on as if to burn hope itself away. The hunger strike ended. The men were broken. But for a brief moment, their silence thundered louder than any riot. The last night, for some, Rikers isn't a stop on the way to trial. It's the end of the road. A teenager, accused of stealing a backpack, was locked up without trial. His case dragged on for years. Inside, he endured beating, starvation, and months in solitary confinement. He begged for release, but the system moved slowly, too slowly. When he was finally freed, the damage clung to him like a shadow. Nightmares, flashbacks, fear that never left. Months later, unable to bear the scars carved into his mind, he took his own life. His story shocked the outside world. His name became a headline. But inside Rikers, there are thousands more like him, names unknown, stories untold, pain buried behind the walls. The island they don't want you to see. Rikers Island isn't just a jail. It's a hidden world of violence, neglect, and silence. A place where human beings, sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, are stripped of dignity, locked in cages, and left to suffer. For decades, officials have promised change. They've called Rikers temporary. They've promised to shut it down. Yet year after year, the gates remain open, swallowing lives whole. The untold horrors of Rikers are not accidents. They are warnings. Warnings of what happens when a system chooses control over compassion, punishment over humanity, and silence over truth. So the next time you hear the name Rikers Island, remember this: it's not just a jail. It's a graveyard of broken lives. And the most chilling horror of all, it's still open.